Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. Today, we are back to another candidate, and we are going all the way out to the East Coast to Massachusetts. This is super exciting. My first East Coast candidate is here, and I could not be more proud to be bringing on John Beccia. John is running to represent Massachusetts in Massachusetts' 6th District, which runs right outside of Boston, all the way from the coast to Salem and everything in between. John has a super big focus on economy, and that's very prevalent in his website. And I thought his kind of take on how we jumpstart the economy, for lack of better words, is what made him super interesting to talk to policy-wise. So I'm super eager for you guys to hear this conversation. But first, a little bit about John. John Beccia is a Lynnfield dad and business leader running for Congress to bring a new kind of leadership to Washington. Leadership rooted in working class values, proven in the private sector, and driven by a commitment to make government work for people again. He knows how to get things done because he's done it, building businesses and creating jobs, all while protecting consumers. But he knows our economy is not working for everyone and that affordability is a daily concern. John is running for Congress to stand up to Trump as he dismantles our democratic institutions. He wants to ensure that his children and the next generation have the same chance to take advantage of the best that this country has to offer. Without further ado, here is my conversation with John. John, thank you so much for coming on. It is great to have you on.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So let's start big and broad. You are a dad, a business leader, and most importantly, not a career politician. What made you decide that now is the moment to run for Congress in Massachusetts' 6th District?
Yeah, I think we're certainly in interesting times and the stakes are getting higher every day. But to me, right now, what's happening is the government is broken and we could do things a whole lot better. And for me, as a father, as a member of this community, I'm worried. I mean, in terms of what's happening with the government, if you look at the Trump administration, by any measure, it's just a disaster right now. I mean, you look at whether it's foreign policy, ICE, or the economy, we're going the wrong way, and we really have threats to our democracy. So, I'm concerned like I said, concerned as a father, but someone who's been in the business world, has seen things that can be done a better way. I want to bring that to the table. What really concerns me too, it's not just at the top of the administration, but it's government in general. I mean, I feel like politicians these days are very self-serving and just aren't getting the job done. And so you don't see people who come in who have the courage and conviction to actually get things done. Maybe sometimes you need to vote against party leadership, or maybe sometimes you need to try to build coalitions with the other side. Too much these days you're seeing politics on the extremes. And so I think we need to level set. We need people who've come at this with different perspectives. I'm a very different candidate. I've never run for office. I don't claim to, have wanted to be a career politician. I've done a lot in the private sector, and I think that will translate. Now, on the other side, we can do things a lot better. And when I say that, I mean, we need to create opportunities. What's happening right now is we are taking things away from the most vulnerable people. And there's so much inequality going on right now in this country. And, whether it's the economy or education or healthcare, these are areas that I want to focus on. I think whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever, you care about the same thing at the end of the day. You care about your family, cares about, having a good job and having an education and being able to have access to healthcare. And so I think this is what we need to start to prioritize. And then we also need to rebuild our sense of community. And I think we've kind of lost our way a little bit in terms of basic decency, basic respect. And so, I think it's time to kind of change up politics a little bit, probably a lot in a big way, and to really, make some moves. And that's what I'm looking to do here.
Do you think was there one moment in this administration that happened where you were like, that's it, that's it, I need to run? Or was it like the slow kind of build up to where you were finally like, this can't go on?
Yeah, I think it's a slow build up, but ever since I announced, it's become, I'm just seeing, like I said, the stakes just keep getting higher and higher every day. Right. And it's just my level of frustration and the people I talk to in the community, the level of concern is great. I mean, not to overstate it, but our democracy really is under attack. We have the best
Right.
democracy in the world. We are a leader in the world, but we're alienating our allies on the world stage from a local perspective. What's going on with ICE is very troubling. I'm a lawyer, we're not following the rule of law. We're not protecting people who have come to this country who are working hard. I mean, we are a country built on immigrants, and we need to get back to that basic decency. So it's been a slow burn, but there's been days where it's just like, okay, but I'm still very positive, very optimistic. Like I said, we can do this, but we need to act now. I think this is why I'm in this race, is that we need people to step up. And we need to, help. It's not just the bigger issues; it's day-to-day issues. People are really struggling, and
Right.
people, the American dream. To me, the American dream is not achievable anymore. And I think it's important that we get back to it. I think, to me, my campaign, is about hope and opportunity. And without opportunity, there is no hope. And so I think it's about level setting, reprioritizing those things, and kind of getting away from the nonsense, which is politics today, which to me seems to be a bunch of petulant children or a bunch of people that are, who can tweet the loudest. And I think, that's not the way I've ever run my business. When you're in the business world or in any kind of relationships, you need to be able to work with people. You need to have common respect and decency
Right.
to get things done, and find common ground and find a common goal. And like I said, I do think that it is there underneath all this noise. I think it's there, and I think we can do this together.
So on the note of people struggling, so families on the North Shore, where you are seeking to represent, are doing everything right and yet still falling behind. What do you think feels most out of reach right now for people and voters that you were talking to?
Yeah, like I said, it's just there's so much inequality, and it's people don't feel like they have opportunities. I've been fortunate in my life and blessed, and but I went to school. I put myself through school and had a mountain of student debt coming out of law school, but I was able to overcome that. I was able to, jobs were attainable, and starting a family and buying a house was attainable. Now you have first-time homebuyers nearing 40 years old. You have people making decisions whether to start a family or raise, kids as a fiscal decision. You have, especially in the North Shore of Massachusetts, you have young people leaving the state at record numbers because there are no incentives. The costs are too high, and there are no incentives to live here. We have great universities, great talent, but we don't have people starting companies. We have 80% of the business here on the North Shore is small business, and they're struggling because of the healthcare costs, because of the tariffs and the reducing workforce. And so these are all things we need to look at. We need to take a holistic approach into solving these issues. I know everybody has their favorite buzzword, whether it's affordability or whether it's, the cost of living. And yes, but we also need to look at this in broader terms, in terms of what the solutions are to at the end of the day, to create those opportunities for folks. And like I said, it's really the people are struggling in terms of, and they're working 2 or 3 jobs. I mean, I think you look at something like what happened with the government shutdown, the first one. Hopefully, we won't have another one again. But with the SNAP program, right? And you realize how many people are relying on these food programs and the food insecurity. These are not people. These are people that are working 2 jobs. These are people that are trying to get ahead. And again, this is why things are just so disjointed and so backward in terms of how we're governing and how we're looking at these issues. And again, it's about being responsible in terms of, if you're fortunate enough to be in these positions, you're fortunate enough to be, real leadership is doing what's best for the community, what's best for the country. And I think we need to get back to that.
Great. I also like that you called out affordability as a buzzword. I just had this conversation with somebody about how, affordability to me, I'm 26 years old. I live with my mom. Affordability to me is about renting. Whereas for somebody who's, 65 to 70 and on a fixed income, affordability is about healthcare or grocery prices. So I hate when people throw it around as if it's this catch-all, because it means something totally different to me than it does to anybody else.
Yeah, everybody's situation is different, and we need to account for people. I mean, we have to make sure that we're not leaving people behind, and
Right.
people should have basic rights and basic opportunities, whether you're an immigrant, whether you're a student or someone who's at the beginning of your career, or whether you're someone in retirement age. I mean, that's another
Right.
thing. People can't retire and live in Massachusetts, even though we have an aging population, because they can't afford to live here and they struggle, and our elderly housing is lacking. And like I said, childcare is really a big issue right now, and it's become a fiscal decision. Or look at the cost of just raising a young child with pre-K, preschool, and all the childcare costs, diapers, clothing, food. I mean, it's really difficult, and you have multiple parents working multiple jobs,
Right.
and it's not the family unit that it once was. And so we need to get back and looking at all these areas, and like in terms of how can we best provide and create a better overall community. And I think if you can't just the other thing when you're in government, you can't just take a look at one of these things because it's going to have an impact on the other. And so I think we have to work together to kind of figure out what is going to really end up leading to the real prosperity that we want as a
Right.
country. And certainly here in the North Shore, we want to encourage people to stay here. We want to revitalize our communities and go the right direction. So that's what I want to focus on. And like I said, I've been someone who's built my own business from the ground up. I started as a lawyer. I was in financial services, worked for banks and fintechs, and then I took a risk. I sat at my kitchen table and I started a company from the ground up, and a consulting firm, and ended up scaling it to over 60 people. And so I understand, when you're running a company, you have to look at things. You have to be the person who's the coach, right? You have to look at
Right.
things on all fronts, and you're not going to be an expert on everything. And that's why you have
Right.
to be educated and surround yourself with good people. But you also have to figure out at the end of the day, how do we get things done? And so, those are the kind of skill sets that I want to bring to the table here and think through as I, take on this journey ahead of me.
So you touched on your career path a little bit. You've worked in finance, law, consumer protection. What did being inside those systems teach you about why the economy isn't working for people?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. My career has started. I started in the banking space as a lawyer and a compliance person, and then I kind of got into more technology based. Financial services has changed a lot over the years, and the fintech is the term, and a lot of people do financial services on their phones and through apps and whatnot. And it's really some of this has been good in terms of one of the issues we've seen in financial services is that people may not have access to traditional banking service, or it's hard to get credit, or it's hard to get loans, and
Right.
especially and then you dig yourself a deeper and deeper hole, right? And so if you don't have fiscal responsibility and be able to manage your finances. And so some of these technologies have helped with that. But what I see there is, and I also teach, I've been a teacher for a long time, an adjunct professor at BU Law, and I've been teaching around financial services and the different emerging technologies, including cryptocurrency and the blockchain. But, what we've seen there is that, again, it's this inequality. It's the ability, the issues that people have on a day to day and managing their finances, and where people really get, you see they struggle. And, see that's where also regulation has come into too, to protect people, because, you have things around overdraft fees. You have fees around you have issues around high
Right.
lending, high interest around credit cards. You see people get all kinds of credit card debt. You see all kinds of issues around, um, not being able to manage the finances, and that's because the underlying issue is you're struggling. People are trying to, you have to pay and feed your family. You have to, be able to survive, and so
Right.
that's why we need to create the opportunities on the other end to be able to take advantage to correct that issue going forward.
Right. I read this article, I think it was Wall Street Journal. The majority of people's car payments are over $1,000, which sounds insane. but like at that point, you're not even giving people the opportunity to catch up in other areas of their life if their car payment is
Mhm.
$1,000. Like that's
Yeah.
just insane.
Yeah, car payments, the rents are out of control. Houses, the median housing price in Massachusetts is over $700,000. That's
Hmm.
why a first-time home buyer is, the age keeps going up and up, and you're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of adult children still living at home. My children are 16 and 18, so hopefully we'll see. My daughter's just
You know
applying to
what? I'm
colleges now.
26 and I
Yeah,
came back,
uh,
so just
yeah.
don't get your hopes up
There you go.
too
Yeah, we'll
soon.
see. We'll see. Well, maybe we can address it. But I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, all these healthcare costs again, too. I mean, God forbid you get into some kind of health issue and, it can really break you, it can break your family. It's
Right.
amazing in terms of, so we need to look at making sure that people have access to things that are fundamental right, like healthcare. But it's got to be affordable. Otherwise, we're just we're going the wrong way, and that disparity, that inequality, is just going to continue to grow from the richest and the poorest in this country, and that's really not the America that we want.
Right. Do you have any information on why the house price in Massachusetts is so high? I mean, it's high. I'm like right outside of Chicago in the suburbs, and it's fairly high, but it's not $700,000 high.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's just because everything else is so expensive, right? And so it's all relative. I mean, the wages are a little, people get paid a little more here, but
Yeah.
there's still a huge disparity. I mean, I think, the cost of everything is, you look at any type of metric, the cost of we're number one in the wrong way in terms of any,
Yeah.
childcare costs and, education costs and all these other areas. And so I think, that's just it becomes very, very difficult and difficult to keep up. And that's why we're seeing a lot of younger people leave the state, and people who are in the state are really struggling and trying to figure out like what is next for them.
Tough question, but if you could focus on one issue first in Congress, what would it be and why?
Well, being a business guy and being the issues that we have, I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about, right? But the economy, right? We just need to rebuild this economy in a way that works for everybody. And I think there's a lot of things. And one is just is having the will and and prioritizing the right things around creating opportunities. But there's so many different levers that we can pull here that make sense. And it starts with making sure that, everything from the way we tax people and making sure that there's fairness there, and that the corporations and the more wealthy are paying their fair share, and that we're giving credits to different areas where people are struggling, whether it's first-time home buyers, where it's childcare credit, whether it's small businesses and small business lending, increasing the SBA loan threshold from 5 to 10 million, or trying to figure out what other areas we can focus on. The other thing is wages, right? We can look at the minimum wage, and we look at how we pay people, but really it's about creating jobs and really kind of turbocharging the economy that way. I think a little bit of if you build it, they will come. And I think, I mentioned that in the North Shore, we have a majority of small businesses, and making sure that they have the ability to thrive. But we also need to bring in some larger corporations. We need to look at how can we incentivize people to build their own companies here in
Hmm.
Massachusetts. And I really do believe in, I talk about the fact that I've been in technology and at the forefront of innovation. And I do believe in innovation economy. I think our economy has to match and to really be a 21st century economy, and to do so across multiple verticals, whether it's biotech or advanced
Right.
manufacturing or healthcare or financial services and things like crypto and AI. We have to lean into that. We have to, obviously, I'm a lawyer and I focus on regulation. So I think there's, you have to make sure that things are regulated and you do it responsibly. But the other side of it is, if you do it right, it can create jobs. It can create uh, products and services that really benefit everybody. And, this is why we need to like revitalize our community. And then the last part of it is we need to really, especially in Massachusetts on the North Shore, we need to build our surrounding infrastructure. So we do have a housing crisis. We do have a lack of affordable housing. And so we need to continue to build around that. And our transportation system is lacking. There's efforts there, but we need to electrify our rail system. We need to build out our rail hubs. and we need to rebuild our community. So when I get to talk about like doing things holistically, it's about, making sure that we have, where there are kind of rail stations and making sure we're building mixed use housing in other communities where people have ability to get to their jobs, in an easy fashion, in an affordable fashion, in a timely fashion. I think that's really important. So it's really about that overall planning, but it's about pulling those levers that are going to provide those opportunities for folks, and then you're going to see some momentum build off of that. And I think, there's other areas that dovetail into that. I mean, education we can talk about for a second, but education also is important because we
Right.
need that workforce. I think that making sure that we have the right opportunities there is vital. One of the big issues for me is vocational schools. So, I think there's many pathways for people for everything from higher ed and college education, but I think we need more different types of training programs, vocational programs, adult education, focus more on technology, focus more on apprenticeships and things like that to really making sure that we're providing multiple pathways for our young people over the course of it. And, it really starts from, early all the way up through high school into higher ed.
So let's actually move on to education. As
Yeah.
you mentioned, college is not the only path to opportunity. What alternatives do you want to strengthen so that young people are not buried in debt just to get ahead?
Yeah. I think we need to rethink our whole kind of educational system. It's unfortunate that we're, cutting everything and we're eliminating the Department of Education and we're just, we see and now we see states struggle right now, but with the lack of federal resources and funding. And so it's a little bit of like a whack-a-mole and coming up with a budget and you're taking from one program and you're giving it to another. But like I said, this has to be across the board kind of focus and reform, starting with preschool, pre-K. We should have universal pre-K. I think that's a big cost for families, working families. And I think alleviating some of that cost and also getting students into the system earlier, I think will be better. I think our K through 12 programs need to be reworked in terms of the curriculum. We need more real world type of curriculum. When we talk about financial literacy, we talk about, basic life skills, things that are really going to prepare you for the next step, not only for higher education, but for life in general. Certain different types of trades, you need to make those options available. And so talk about vocational schools. In Massachusetts, we have a lot of new high schools being built. And what's great is that they're actually now starting to build some more of these trade programs within some of these new, more traditional high schools. So Salem, Massachusetts is an example of that with the new school that they're proposing there. And then, with the higher education, that looks a lot different for folks, and there has to be different opportunities there. In Massachusetts, we do have tuition-free community college, and I think that's great. That's something that should be pushed out perhaps on a nationwide basis. But I also think that there has to be more specialized schooling and training programs, adult training programs, maybe some private public partnerships for folks that will be benefit. If you want to, you're in a job that might be more of a lower level job. How do you get to that next level? It could be through the tuition free community college, but it could be through other types of education programs that have federal funding and federal granting. So I think, we have to look at all those options and make sure that we're, again, providing a really broader education portfolio for folks, moving forward.
Okay, that's super interesting. I did not know that Massachusetts had tuition-free community colleges. The more you
Hmm.
learn.
Yeah. But again, I mean, I think, it's been great. It's been a great program, but like I said, when you have the budget, it does take away from other things that might be helpful in terms of, the K through 12. I mean, many times when you're trying to manage a state budget, especially with having a lot of the cuts happening at the federal level, you really have to pick and choose.
Right.
And, but there's other states that are doing different types of programs and trying to provide more opportunity. I think Florida uses a program. You take money from the lottery, create these different types of scholarship programs or free college type of programs. And so we need to look at this more at the federal level as well. It's nice the states are trying to innovate, and the states always did tend to be some laboratories for innovation here, but we should take the best of the best, and we should make sure that we're pushing it out that way, that we have a very educated workforce and students who actually can thrive as they
Right.
grow older.
Yeah. I also learned when I was interviewing somebody that's running for Congress in Illinois, and they let me know that we have a similar problem. We use the weed tax money from the
Mm,
marijuana, and we use it to pay a portion of it, not all of it, to pay
yeah,
for a education program for people in recovery from addiction to get an
yeah.
education and go out to be like addiction specialists and therapists and whatever. And that would be fantastic to have at the federal level, absolutely. Just
Mhm.
like the redistribution of those funds that, some people complain about sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, at the federal level, it's very difficult to govern. I mean, and also, legislation, the way legislation is made at the federal level is
Right.
difficult because, you have good ideas and then they get add-ons and multiple, it would be nice almost to have single-use legislation or bills that pass, that really where we can focus on the things that matter and get one
Right.
thing done and move to the next thing. But the problem is that, when you try to push these things through, it becomes very, very convoluted over time.
Right. Right. Like everybody knows the picture of the ACA. It was like 1,000-page bill. Like it became this big monster. And same with like the government funding bills. Like it's these huge, massive, like nobody could possibly read it in a timely manner thing, which makes it so hard to pass something that is meaningful.
Yeah, it's often an all or nothing approach, and like I said,
Right.
the problem you have now is that a lot of this is driven by leadership, and I'm sure there's people that Republicans that did not like certain things, so we know this in the big beautiful bill, right? But we need more people that are going to have the courage and conviction to get in there and really challenge these things, and also try to figure out how to ways to work together and find common ground and be able to
Right.
work through these issues on a bipartisan basis.
So, bringing jobs to the North Shore is an issue that is central to your campaign. What
Mhm.
kind of industries or investments do you think make sense for the region's future?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like I mentioned, the innovation economy to me is big in terms of making really leaning into technology and making sure that we have 21st century jobs here in Massachusetts, and not only bringing companies from out of the state or from other areas, but really encouraging our talented young people and students to build and start new companies here. I've been part of a startup world and part of venture backed companies. And I think, that is something that we need to really make sure that we're encouraging and that we have local talent that are building local companies. But in general, it's about leaning into all these different areas that can really support our community. And I think, we need to look at things. I mean, we used to have a lot of these cities and towns used to be manufacturing centers, but I think, manufacturing itself has changed a lot over the years, but there is ways there to do that differently and better and actually create jobs. And so, like, when I talk about advanced manufacturing, that's one thing. When I talk about healthcare, Massachusetts has always been at the forefront of healthcare. We have great hospitals. We have great, um, research centers and clinics and things like that. So I think we need to make sure that we continue to lean into that and not have people leave the state and not have those great companies leave. So those are some of the different areas. I think, we just need to make sure that we're incentivizing people, companies
Right.
to start here, to stay here, that we have the communities to support them in terms of housing, in terms of affordability, in terms of education opportunities and talent. And so, like I said, it's a holistic approach in making sure that we're encouraging all these different types of businesses to stay here. And then but we also can't forget our small business. We have tremendous small businesses that really drive the economy and they're the engine of the economy. And we have a lot of interesting communities in the North Shore in this district. We have some kind of coastal communities, and we have Gloucester, which is a fishing community. We have some areas that rely a lot on tourism, like Salem. Everybody knows about the Salem witches.
Mhm.
We have a great, great beaches, and then we have other great cities and towns. And so a city like Lynn, which is really um, having a lot of positive changes, a lot of great things happening, within the downtown, within the community. I think we just need to continue to lean into that, and we need to continue to find ways to attract, more things that are going to ultimately help overall.
Right, absolutely. So you touched on Massachusetts has great healthcare.
Hmm.
However, in general, healthcare costs continue to rise while access is uneven. What kind of reforms do you think would make the biggest difference for families that are choosing between care and rent?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, right? Like healthcare, what's more important than your health, right? And how much of more of a fundamental right should healthcare should not be something that breaks you, not some should not be a choice between taking care of your health, your family's, your caregiver for, someone in your family, and that it's overwhelming, right? And so I think we need to look at it, in terms of making sure that everybody has access to healthcare, affordable healthcare, right? And so I am a proponent of universal healthcare. I do still think there should be a private option, but I think the private healthcare also needs to become more affordable, and you can do that, maybe through decoupling it from your employer, or through, certainly we need to be taking some of the special interests out of here to and reducing some of the administration costs, which are causing issues. But so I think it's creating those types of programs which will benefit all. And then I also think we need to be looking at healthcare in different areas and expanding our coverage and expanding the way that we look at different programs. And so, I think there's areas that right now are underserved. For example, from a veterans benefit standpoint or elder care, we have an aging population. And then mental health and addiction recovery to me is very important. And I think, when you look at some of these things, we only tend to really take a short-sighted approach or treat the underlying issue. And so when you look at mental health, and I have some, experience with family members and people I know who have suffered through mental health and addiction. And, it's really about getting people back on their feet. It goes back to my overall theme of opportunity. It's not just about, treating someone and sending them off the way, but on their way, but it's about, job programs and education and family support and, preventative care. And I think we need to be looking at all these things. And, speaking of preventative care, I think we also need to be incentivizing that for people. So before people
Right.
get sick, to make sure that there's, people are taking care of themselves and their family members. And that will also ultimately reduce healthcare costs. Right now in Massachusetts, it's difficult to get a primary care physician. It's difficult to be able to, do the things that you need to do, to be able to, live in wellness and have this type of approach to things. And so I think, from a government perspective, we need to look across the board and make some of these changes. And it does, again, just come down to the simple thing of healthcare is a fundamental right, and we need to figure out how to make it available to people, and we need to figure out how to give people the tools that they need to be able to have that healthy lifestyle.
Right, absolutely. The one thing that I like kind of thought of off of that was, after the Affordable Care Act launched, there were tons of people that ended up starting businesses because there was no longer that fear of, well, shit, if I quit my job, I'm no longer going to have insurance. Now there was the public option. And I think people
Mhm,
forget about that having that
mhm,
public option and having what should be an affordable option, although it isn't anymore
mhm,
given the premium skyrocketing, having that affordable options provides people opportunities. It provides
mhm,
to people starting small businesses and building up their local economies. And people forget that. People forget how
mhm.
excited people were to be able to do what they wanted to do because there was the public option.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. Yeah, no, I think there's been some challenge. Why I favor having also a private piece of this is there has been some challenges with single payer. I mean, we had in Vermont, for example, they tried to do it and they had issues just in terms of the government managing it there. So I think, I think it's a healthy to have these optionality, right? As long as everybody gets access to it and it's affordable, and you perhaps create some competition as well, I think that's
Right.
all a good thing. But
Right.
the
Well, and it
thing that's
also
also
oh, go
yeah,
on. Well, I was
okay,
going to say it also forces private, like your workplace, if you do choose to get insurance from your work, it forces your workplace to compete with the public option and offer you better insurance than what the public
right,
option is.
yeah.
Duh.
Competition is always a good thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's also frustrating with healthcare is that and any of these issues really is. Um, the money is always there. There's always an ability to get these things done. You look at what happened with COVID, and you look what happened with all the programs that came out of that, or you look at things like the PPP loans and things like, things that were done to bridge gaps in an extreme situation or a crisis situation. But it's really just Congress having the will, prioritizing these areas, having a sensible approach. I mean, I think also, obviously there's limits to things you can do, but it's, there has to be some kind of fiscal responsibility, but there's also, we need to prioritize the right areas, which is providing people these fundamental rights, providing people opportunities, and making sure that we are not just wasting resources. And so you tell me that we could spend millions of dollars to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, but we can't afford to. We have to cut certain healthcare programs, or we have to cut
Right.
certain
Hmm.
education programs, or such as one small example. But I mean, the government, to my chagrin, the government's never going to run as efficiently as a business. But we can do a whole lot better, and we will. I think we just need to get like-minded people together. We need to find common ground, and we need to really focus on these things that are important
Right.
for people every day.
Right. So let's move on to public safety. You talk about public safety as more than just policing. To you, what does a community rooted approach to safety look like in practice?
Keyword there is community, right? It takes everybody, all hands on deck. But I think from a policing standpoint, I think community policing is important, and we see this more and more. But they need resources, in federal, whether it's federal funding or other types of funding, need resources, need training. Also need to be, moving into the 21st century and be able to understand some of the things that are happening that might be policing might be different, a lot different than it was, even 10, 20 years ago. And so making sure that we do that. We need to make sure that we're addressing both, you know, issues, underlying issues, as well as issues that are
Right.
front and center. And the issues that are front and center are gun violence, of course. So we need to make sure that we have really good, better gun laws. We need to make sure that we're banning assault weapons. We need to make sure that we're making it more difficult for people who may want to use guns in an inappropriate way to obtain those weapons, and for people to be prosecuted who are using those weapons to the fullest extent of the law. Um, but we also need to make sure that we're back to some of the other areas around the mental health,
Right.
addiction, and being more preventative and making sure that we're taking care of people before there becomes a crisis or before there becomes an issue. And we need to be really in the community and working with all groups and all parties. I mean, we have some good examples in my district here, in terms of some groups we have, that are working right now. For example, we have a city where a lot of the immigrant population are afraid to report crimes. Right. So crime is down, but they're just because they're not reporting it because they're like, hey, we
Right.
alert the authorities. Here comes ICE, and that's the end of that. And so there's actually, some third party groups, there's a group that's unarmed third party group that's helping bridge the gap. And they're responding to these issues. They're trying to, deal with them the best that they can and working with law enforcement in a responsible way to deal. Obviously, public safety is still important, but just making sure that they're addressing these things and getting people the help that they need. But also, so, we need those public-private partnerships, and we need to make sure that we're addressing all these things, on a broader basis.
Right. Well, I think like a lot of what you're saying is just striking me as like making it more like humanity focused, like making it more personable and treating everybody as humans, which doesn't happen a
What a
lot
concept.
in
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's tons of examples of that, like you talked about, like bringing on social workers that are better able to de-escalate issues around mental health and substance abuse. Like those, there's more and more adoption of that around the country, and you're right. It should be a more humanistic approach.
Yeah, for sure. I think, civility, we need to get back to civility. We need to get back to basic respect and again, working through these issues and partnering. There's a lot of great groups out there. There's a lot of great, I'm learning more and more every day being out in these communities. There's a lot of great nonprofits. There's a lot of great folks that are trying to help people. And, we need to make sure that, people who are struggling are aware of these groups. But we also have a responsibility, from a government perspective to be able to making sure that, no one is left behind, so to speak, and then making sure that we have,
Right.
these fundamental protections and fundamental rights are addressed.
Absolutely. So, speaking of the immigrant communities in Massachusetts, ICE operations have been happening across the country, as I'm sure you are aware. And I believe one of the first like viral ICE videos came out of Massachusetts back in early 2025. Now, what are you seeing and hearing in Massachusetts? And as a lawyer, what concerns you the most about how these operations are being carried out?
Yeah, this goes back to your earlier question about like, that really triggered, like, not really, but these are the events that really get to me daily now. I mean, and what's happened over the last week or so, really just really troubling and just really disheartening to see in America and see the way the rogue actions of ICE and the way that they're treating people. As a lawyer, I believe we need to follow the rule of law and we need to have a responsible way to deal with issues. Now, we shouldn't have open borders and our borders need to be protected and bad people shouldn't be in this country. But this country was built on immigrants. My grandparents came from Italy and there needs to be a pathway to citizenship and there needs to be protection for people who are in this country. Massachusetts, North Shore, over 25% of the workforce are immigrants. And they're in this country, they're doing work, they're families, responsible people who are trying to add to the community. And it's unfortunate to see that they're scared right now. They're scared to walk their kids to school. They're scared to, be out, report crimes or be out and about in the community. And so, yeah, I think we just need to get back to a sensible approach on immigration. It's not a perfect system, but I think, we need to, really get away from it. What's happening with ICE is definitely not the answer. And so I think from a congressional perspective, all these things need to be looked at in terms of how we're funding ICE or how we're, certainly what levels of training are happening or things like that. But I think we need to go back and address the underlying issue as a Congress in terms of making sure that we're addressing, making immigration a more responsible thing, a more, really based on the rule of law.
Right. One thing that you have mentioned is getting back to civility and being able to, cross those bridges and work with lots of people. Uh, I'm sure we're both seeing the kind of responses by the right to the violence that we are seeing performed by ICE. Let's start with how I come at it. I come at it
Mhm.
and I say that the time for civility is like, it's past. What is your opinion on that? Is it past? And if it's not, then how do you build that bridge to get back there when it feels like the right in this kind of conversation has just completely fled the scene and is not ready to come to the table?
Yeah. It's interesting right now. What you see or what I see when I'm out in the communities, you have there's a spectrum, right? And so you have some people that just want, they can't take it. They want blood. They're so upset that it's visceral, right? And they're just like, no, there's no reasoning. And there's other people that are just totally checked out. They don't even want to deal with it anymore. I think, in terms of getting things done, we need a kind of a combination approach, right? I think there are times and place when I talk about courage and conviction, and I talk about doing the right thing. There are times where you do need to pound on the table, or you do need to say, "This is the line in the sand, and this is we cannot stand for destroying democracy, and we need to make sure that we're protecting our citizens." But I also think to move forward, we need to be able to find ways to work together. We need to
Yeah,
rebuild our communities. We need to get back to neutral. And so why this is why this election is so important. There are no guardrails right now, right? There is
right,
no we do have a beautiful system, a democratic system and three branches of government, but that is, you know, does not exist, right? Even our courts are politicized, right? So we need to be able to take back the House as Democrats and just get us back to neutral. And we need to be able to figure out how we can find common ground and work together and continue to, there's going to be fights. There's going to be times when we need to, like I said, draw that line in the sand, but it can't be, we also have to need to be making sure that we're protecting our citizens. We need to make sure
right,
that our communities are safe. We need to make sure that our constituents are served properly, and we're not just constantly bickering with each other. And so we can't lose sight of that and lose sight of the kind of real focus, which is prioritizing, getting people the opportunities and prioritizing the day to day. But also we can't live in this polarized society right now that we're living in. And so
right,
I think so yeah, it comes down to that. I think it's a combination, and you gotta know when to speak up, but also when to
right,
maybe take the temperature down. And I think that's also why we need people in these positions in Congress that have the right demeanor, that have the right maturity, and have the
right,
right perspective, and that they understand the times where how to work together and
right,
how to be able to build these coalitions.
right. So let's move on to some closing questions and wrap it up.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
have said that Democrats are not offering enough solutions. What would you do differently in Washington in order to actually deliver results and solutions?
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, yeah, having real solutions and not, like I said, you can't just get things done by doing long speeches on the floor of the House or in Senate, or by being up late night and tweeting. And it's really about focusing on those areas where people really
Right,
care about it. And so, to me, I'm focused on rebuilding the economy, rethinking education, and fixing healthcare. And under those issue areas, having really, you know, these are the three or four things that we need to do, and we'll continue to build off that. But this is what you need to do to revitalize and to provide the opportunities to folks in these different areas. And like I said, it's also about you maybe bringing some common sense back into this, and
right,
also working with other people to find common ground. And so I think that's the approach that I want to take, in terms of, being in Congress and having real ideas. And, from a Democrat perspective, working with the party, I am a proud Democrat, and I do believe we're on the right side of things here. But I also think, working with the party to be able to get people together to kind of also work within within the areas that they care about most, and to be able to bring these priorities to the table. I think the other piece here to me that we're missing, it's not just Congress, but also part of my campaign is trying to get more people involved in general, especially young people, right? I think it's a really a critical time. We've seen a lot of challenges to our democracy. I have kids that are 16 and 18, and, it's their future, and it's all our futures. And I think people need to step up, and their voices need to be heard. And I know it's frustrating right now. People are overwhelmed, and people are like, oh my God, this is crazy. Other people think it's great. But, I think it's part of democracy. We need to get people more involved, and people really, helping push things going forward, because I think, especially with politicians or with what's going on in DC, that will move the needle as well. You do have a voice, and you can move the needle. And
right,
like I said, right now, we can't just have this group of people in DC controlling things. We need to hear from the public. And,
right,
I think we're seeing it, and more than we have in a long time. I think we're seeing people out in, especially here in Massachusetts and our cities and towns in the really cold weather, in the 12-degree weather, holding signs and getting people to think about, like, hey, this is
Right.
not right, or this is the way we should be doing things. And I think
Right.
I want to see more of that. I want to see, but I want to see also like more young people involved in that process and having a voice, and other groups too that might feel like they are left behind and don't have a voice here. I think our immigrants, our members of the LGBTQ community, are members of different perspective, groups that may feel left out. I think everybody needs, that's what's great about America. And, I think it's to have a civil society and to have a society that's built on these democratic ideals. I think we need to get back to that and get people together and start moving forward in the right direction.
Right. Absolutely. And I've beat this horse to death so many times about young people needing to get involved because I think about No Kings 1.0 and how the average age and gender was like a 35-year-old woman. And I was like,
Mhm.
where are my people? Where are
Yeah.
my like 18 to 29-year-olds that are I constantly see saying they're so upset about the system. Like, why are you not out there? It's it's tough when it feels like the whole system is stacked against you. But I do see a light at the end of the tunnel right now.
Yeah. And and it's difficult, right? This is a different, maybe this is like the old old guy talking now, but we live in a different world today. We do. And,
Right.
I want to get back to communities, right? I think people also, it's easy for people to hide behind their computers or their phones, or people tend to get their news from their own sources. People tend to not, go out to community events or to participate in civic things anymore. And so, that makes it more difficult, right? That makes that divide a little bigger, a little greater in terms of, well, this is, I'm on this side of the fence and you're on that side of the fence. But I find when you actually do get people together that there is, common themes, things that people all care about,
Right.
similarities. And so I think, we just need to get back to that.
Absolutely. When voters in the 6th district decide whether to trust you with their vote, what do you want them to really understand about the kind of leadership that you would bring?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I touched on some already, but I think, the real thing is that, these are serious times and we do need people that can get things done, and that can move the needle. And I think that, like I said, that private sector experience should translate. And the fact that, I think someone who's been able to build coalitions, be able to work with government, be able to get things done, I think is important now more than ever. And having that demeanor and the ability to work through these issues in a very,
Right.
very difficult time, and very troubled times. But more important than that is, like, I'm someone I've lived in this community, been in my town of Lynnfield over 20 years. I'm a father. I'm just someone, I care about the community. I'm doing this because I believe in public service. I believe if you're lucky enough to be in these positions, you serve the people and should be figuring out ways to help your constituents, work with people, be deeply embedded in the community. And so, I'm doing that now. I mean, I'm not running around searching for political endorsements. I'm actually talking to nonprofit groups and church groups and schools and business leaders and owners of coffee shops and, people at the grassroots, because I think that's what's important. And again, if I'm fortunate enough to win, that's what I gotta do is you need to understand, like, what are people feeling out there? What will
Right.
move the needle? What will help people? And how can we do that? Now, we can't, promise everything. I would love to promise everything, but you can promise, the one thing I would promise is that, no one will outwork me. I will give you 110, 120%. I've done that in my life in all different areas. And I will also maintain, you know, I'm I believe we can get great things done. I'm very optimistic and positive, even in these troubled times. I think, we still have the greatest country in the world, and we have the greatest community here. I love Massachusetts. I love the North Shore. I think we can do great things, and
Right.
that's what I want to get done. So that's why my hat's in the ring. It's this is not the easiest thing to do, to
Right.
run for Congress, and it's
It's
not the most
vulnerable.
glamorous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the most glamorous job. But I think again we just need more people to step up and
Right.
more people to work together.
Right. People are always talking about the like I think the salary in Congress is like 195 or something like that and are like, "Oh,
Mm.
that's so much money." And I'm like, "It's kind of shitty work." Like
Yeah, yeah.
I think they've
Well, you
earned
see
it
it.
to be
Yeah.
quite honest.
Yeah, well, you're seeing a lot of people leave Congress too. I mean, you have just the dysfunction of it all. You
Right.
see, the political violence obviously is troubling, and the inability to get things done, right? So, like I said, I don't claim to have the magic wand, but I do feel like I have the ability to at least I understand, what needs to be done and
Right.
try to bring people together with me on this. And again, hopefully we'll see, this is a very important election. It's much bigger than me or the sixth district race. I think, hopefully we'll see really good people get elected. We'll see some change in leadership. And I think, that will lead us down the path that, at least
Right.
in my opinion, is the path that we need to go down.
So one last softball question for you.
Hmm.
Hypothetically, I am
Yeah.
getting on a plane. I'm coming out to Massachusetts and I'm coming to the 6th district. I need a restaurant recommendation.
Hmm.
What is your recommendation in the 6th district?
My God, I got 39 cities and towns there. I don't want to alienate any of them, but no,
You
I
can
think
you
you
can
can't.
break it up. You can do
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
like best
No, I would
lunch, best
think,
dinner.
yeah. No, I would think that you want to, I think you want to, mix it up a little bit in terms of
Okay.
maybe hit a city like Lynn. And there was one place that's just was up for a Michelin star. I think it's Nightshade Noodle. And then you want to
Okay.
go maybe up to like a Newburyport, which is on the coast,
Good
and hit
fish.
some of the places there. Some seafood places.
Mhm.
You might just want to get like a lobster roll at a local
Classic.
place,
Yes.
and so so I think you want to mix it up a little bit and go from there. So I think there's a lot of different options. So we also still have a lot of different ethnicities here. Now, I'm Italian. I'm always going to be impartial to Italian food, and we have some great. It's not
That's
just the north
okay.
end, not just the north end in Boston. You can go
Yeah.
to places like Peabody. You can go to other towns on the North Shore here and get some really good Italian food and so some different experiences. I would probably advise you to come in the spring and summer. Although, our seasons are all great.
Yeah.
Salem, if you want to come, obviously Halloween is the
So
craziest
I've seen
time
yeah,
to go to
yeah,
Salem, but there's some wonderful restaurants and some cafes and some other areas there that you can enjoy. So it's a long-winded way. I won't name all 39 cities and towns, but I think it's such an eclectic area though. It's so beautiful. Like I said, we have everything from, coast and to traditional cities to rural areas,
yeah.
and
Right.
it really does make it unique. And we have the change of seasons and all those things which are really fun. And so it's a great place to grow up, it's a great place to live. And so I would encourage you to come out and visit, check it out.
I've been to Boston.
Okay.
Haven't and Cape Cod. That's
Okay.
about it though. I do need to make my journey back out east though. It's on my list of things to do, I promise.
Okay. Well, New England is great. We have everything. We have beaches, we have mountains, we have, you name
Right.
it, cities and towns, and a lot of culture, a lot of history. That's the other thing too about the North Shore. We have lots of history here. And so, it's there's definitely a lot to explore
Right,
for
for
sure.
sure.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, well, that is
Yeah.
all I have for you. Is there anything else that you feel like I might have missed?
I don't think so. I appreciate the time. I
Of
just, like I said,
course.
I think this is a critical time and it's important for people to step up, and it's important. The other thing that's I always talk about is important to listen and not lecture. So I'm learning along the way and just trying to understand, what people care about. And so it was great to hear
Right.
your perspective and what you're hearing and through some of your questions and through some of your thoughts. And I just encourage people, if they're interested in this campaign or they're interested in me, to reach out. And I'm happy to have a coffee or meet anybody, anywhere, anytime, and learn more.
Love it. Well, I will have all your social media and your donation page in the show notes so that people can go to that if they feel so compelled. But otherwise, that is it. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with John as much as I enjoyed recording it. I think I say this every time, but listening to Democrats from across the country is always so interesting to me because it just goes to show what a big tent party we have, but two, what issues matter in different states. You know, my perspective is just in Illinois, and I can't account for what Democrats in Massachusetts are talking about or Democrats in Pennsylvania are talking about and what they want. So it's always super interesting to hear from people that are not in this state that I'm in. But yeah, if you would like to donate to John's campaign, I will have that linked in the show notes. So you can go ahead and do that. And otherwise, that's it. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share with someone who could use this information. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and remember to get involved with the people that are running for office near you. I will see you guys next week.